For having me. It's nice to give a talk on something I love so much and really focused on is my soils. You know, if you go to my land, you'll see right now corn growing, calabazas, and garden. But in order for all that to happen, you know, I'm real intentional about keeping my soils going. So we're going to talk a lot of techniques about how to understand soils and build soils. Here's a picture of my southern field, and it looks pretty barren in this picture. You know, it's of course it's been raining now, but ever since I've been applying compost and working this land, it just gets better and better. So you know, you can see those piles of compost, and I made that compost, and the pile is kind of in the foreground with the wood chips, but we'll see more of how the piles look. You know, there's all kinds of ways you can make piles, and now I'm thinking of a picture I should have showed you, but you can actually see it on my blog, and I'll share that with you at the end. And so I build compost, and then I apply it to the land, and now I let the chickens spread it around. What's real nice if you have chickens is you can just let your chickens loose, and then before you know it, that compost will be evenly distributed all over your land, and there won't be any harmful bugs in there anymore. If there was, or weed seeds. Okay, here we go to the next slide. So the first thing we got to recognize is, you know, if you're building compost, you're putting it on an existing system. And, you know, you could go to the hardware store and buy everything you need. You could buy mushroom organic compost, and you could buy a whole pallet of it, or you could buy a dump truck, and you could completely, you know, alter your system. But I don't believe in that. You know, I don't believe in having a garden that looks like a 5-star garden, but is completely artificial. You know, my garden, you might look at it and say, well, why is that corn 1.5 feet tall, and that other corn is 3 feet tall, and that one's a nice shade of green, and the other one's a lighter shade of yellow? You know, but I let nature do its thing. And the research suggests that if you don't provide for your crops every single need, that it actually produces more protein and more available nutrients. That crops that are water stressed and have less nutrition in the soil actually have better quality product. And that's kind of counterintuitive. You would think, you know, yeah, the crops need all the nitrogen that they can use, and then they'll come up with a better protein. And that's actually not the case. So you're dealing with an existing system. Where's your soils coming from? You know, here in the Española Valley, these soils could be coming all the way from Colorado and depositing on the banks. You know, if you're in Chimayo, you know, they're coming more from Truchas. So you're thinking, well, what were the rocks that were broken down? So that's the process of us building soil is, you know, you have the rocks that get broken down by weathering, by the action of water. And you can change the slide. You know, I hope you're all hearing me okay. I'm cool with taking the mask off while I talk if it's better for you guys. I'm a school teacher, so I was doing that. You know, I was teaching the whole time with a mask when I wasn't talking, and without a mask when I could. So this, would people rather I take the mask off, or okay? Let me ask this: are you hearing me okay with the mask? Yeah. Okay, cool. Because it doesn't bother me either way. So if you want to do a soil test, you know, you could look it up in the internet about how to figure out what's in your soil. There's sifting screens. The easiest way is to shake it up in water and then let it sit and see how the layers come out. And people get overdone about this. You know, they'll tell you, oh, you got this clay soil, you can't grow watermelons. You know, you have too much clay, you can't grow chile. You know, oh, you're too sandy, you know, your cabbage isn't gonna like it. You can't grow potatoes in sandy soil. Okay, maybe if you're, you know, somebody who doesn't save seed, if you're gonna buy your seeds every year, then okay, you're stuck in the textbook way of the land grant university's conception of what agriculture is. If you're gonna save your seeds, guess what? You'll find a chile in your field. It'll take you 3 to 5 years. But you'll find a chile that's just fine in clay. If you save seeds, it doesn't matter what your soil is. It matters how you paid attention to your seed. Okay, well, that said, you should know what's going on in your soil. I personally love having clay, heavy clay soil. If I don't irrigate for 3 weeks, there's still moisture in my soil. Some things might not have liked it, but guess what? I weeded them out over the last 20 years because I save seed. So if it doesn't like clay soil, it's not in my field. But anyways, just so you can know what the soil is made up of, you know, it's sand, silt, and clay. So clay is your smallest particle. It's so small, it has this flat character to it, that if you mix it too much when it's wet, all those flat plates of clay soil will line up. That's why pottery and although the construction works really well. So you always want to be careful. If you're a heavy clay soil, you do not want to hoe weeds, or you don't want to disturb your soil when it's moist. You start stirring your soil, clay soil, when it's moist, all those clay particles are going to start to line up, and you're going to start to create, you know, an adobe-like character in your soil. So you got to be aware of that. Maybe this is a case where you are intentional about adding organic matter or sand. Again, don't be buying a dump truck of sand to alter your soil character. But if you want to say, hey, I'm going to put a little bit of sand here and there and nudge my soil, that's more my style. But anyways, you can look, you know, if you put all your soil in a jar and you shake it, it'll separate out. And you'll see your sand layer in a minute. In 2 hours, you'll see your silt layer. And then once the water's clear, that your third layer is your clay layer, so you can get an idea of what your soil looks like, at least like that. Beyond that, you need to do soil sifting and get a percentage, and then you can look at this type of table in the next slide. You know, I put those ratios just so you know that a clay particle, the ratios you see there, you know, clay particle is 500 times smaller than a sand grain, right? A silt particle is 15 times smaller than a sand grain. So just so you have an idea, you know, your soil composition. Next.
So somebody in the chat is saying, if you add a drop of soap to that soil shape test, or add a drop of soap.
All right. Cool. Like I say, that's an interesting exercise. I actually haven't done it on my soil because I'm focusing on the seed aspect of it and the relational aspect. But if you do get into it, they have these cool pyramids where you put the percent silt, percent clay, and percent sand, and then you can name your soil and know what it is. And this is nice. If you inherited some barren piece of land, maybe you want to do this, and then you want to start working your soil and see how your character of your soil changes over time. But this is like basic soil science of figuring this stuff out. But again, we have other topics. So let's go to the next slide. So I like to think of ecology, and in all my soil, in everything that I do is ecology. What's ecology? Is you define your system. What's your system? It's your field, it's your compost bin, it's your body, it's your town, it's your whole acequia, it's your county, whatever it is you want to call it. It's going to have inputs. You're going to bring inputs to your system. There's going to be transformations inside the system. There's going to be outputs. Okay, so let's say you input some compost into your garden, then it's going to go undergo transformation. You're going to output some lettuce, some corn. So then you're thinking, all right, what degree am I putting inputs, and what degree is those transformations going to happen so I can have some really nice lettuce and corn on the output. So again, when you're considering your inputs, are you getting your inputs locally? Or are you, going to Lowe's and buying a pallet full of compost? So then all that's gonna affect, it's gonna cascade through your system. So the big deal in this is looking at your compost bin or your worm bin as an ecosystem. What are you putting into it? How many worms are in there? What are they gonna transform? What do they wanna eat? How's that gonna happen? The whole bit, and then what comes out? Does it have the nutrients? Does it have what you want in the right order? And me, again, I'm relational and I give nature so much time to do it. I don't feel like I need to analyze it. Like I need to send samples to NMSU. When I build a compost pile, it'll be 2 or 3 years before I harvest that. But the good news is I've been doing composting for 20 years. So I always have compost to access, always. I got 4 different sources to access compost right now, if I have the time to do it. So looking at ecology. So looking at how nature does it, we could go to the next slide. Is, so we had the earlier slide about how soils were created. Then biology starts to move in. Up in the highlands where weathering is happening and rocks are turning into cobble, or turning into gravel, turning into sand, and then coming down the mountains and making soil, you have that organism on the bottom left corner called lichen. Lichen is algae, bacteria, and fungi all working together. They used to think it was just algae and fungi, and then they found there was a bacteria in the mix too. So the smallest and most ancient organisms are working to turn the rocks into soil to pull out the nutrients. The fungi in that mix has acids that is dissolving the rocks and then releasing nutrients. So as you're thinking about your compost system, you want to pay homage to these microorganisms, because they're the ones that are going to do it for you up in the mountains and in your compost and in your worm bin, bacteria, algae, and fungi. So you're looking for sources of those. My favorite source of fungi is under the big logs in my wood pile. Whenever I roll over a big log in my wood pile and I see this white stuff like spider web, it looks like white fuzzy stuff, and you might think it's a spider web, but it's actually mushroom mycelium. I scrape that up and I make sure it ends up in my worm bin or my compost bin, because that's fungi that's going to help dissolve, break down all your woody material in your compost. Bison, most of our food is being grown in the Midwest, in the Mississippi Valley. Why? Because buffalo, bison herds have been roaming that area for millions of years, and that's our best soil in the nation because of the animal action. Okay, so no, we can't have a bison herd in our field. But we do, some of us can't have animals. We can mimic the effect of roaming animals. You can do rotational grazing. If you have sheep, if you have goats, you can not only use them, their manure for your composting system, you can use them to till your soil, to plant your native grasses, to control your invasive weeds. You can use these animals, and they'll exercise their biology, but they'll be doing work for you. And if you did it right, you wouldn't need a brush cutter to clear your acequias. You wouldn't need a tractor to plow your land. You could have your animals doing all the work for you. The other example I gave is I'll put a wheelbarrow full of compost here, and in less than an hour, 10 chickens will spread it out. And I didn't have to lift a rake or a shovel, except to move the wheelbarrow there. So there's the fungi again. And then there's your root structure. Look at your root structure and, try to get to know how your crops do their roots. Alfalfa has a deep root system. Wheat has a shallow root system. So if you plant wheat and alfalfa together, they can coexist because they're using different profiles of the soil. So you can be thinking what's going on above ground, what's going on below ground. So the effects of organisms on soil. We can go to the next slide. So here's all the organic matter in the soils, just to show you some of the diversity. And why are you thinking of diversity? Because when you're building compost, you're gonna see all kinds of things. And you might not like them, but you know what? Chances are the biology likes them. Right? You might not like worms. If you don't like worms or little beasties like that, this probably isn't the job for you. If you can't handle smells without, ralphing and running, this might not be the activity. You might need another hobby. My kids sometimes, it stinks out here. I go, hey, that's the smell of money or the smell of love. And so yeah, you have all these. So from bacteria, fungi, protozoa are like little beasties, little microscopic worms and microscopic organisms. Nematodes are really the microscopic worms, right? They say there's so many nematodes on Earth that if you were God and says everything on Earth disappears except for nematodes, you would see everything on Earth. We're actually covered in nematodes, right? Sorry, you can't get rid of it. There's no dinosaur that's going to get rid of it. And if you try and get rid of it, you'll probably kill yourself, like literally. But the nematodes are covering all the soils, all the mountains, all the trees, everything. The only place you wouldn't see an outline, a weird outline of nematodes would be the highest peaks in the deepest ocean. But basically, the entire Earth is covered with life. Algae and slime molds, arthropods, that's a fancy way of saying bugs. Gastropods, snails, earthworms. When you see earthworms, hey, that's a gift. I'm so happy now, I cannot put a shovel in my land without finding 2 or 3 worms, quick. Our soils, 20 years of this type of management. And then plant matter, roots, litter, and now they're saying keep your soil covered. I'm a believer in that too.
Yeah.
And then all kinds of other organisms. So, just to give you a background on the types of things you might see either in your soil, in your field, or in your compost. We can go to the next slide. So, and then there's your soil structure. So if you didn't disturb your soil, your top layer is your organic layer. That's what you're going to augment with your compost, your A horizon 2. That's when you till, you're going to till your organic matter into your A horizon, and you're probably not even going to touch your B or your C horizon unless, of course, you're on super thin soils and you're going to start to develop those. So your soil is layered out. You're going to take advantage of that in your agriculture. And then your soil has porosity and permeability. Porosity is how much airspace there is. And permeability is how connected those air spaces are so water can move through your soil. If you have a lot of porosity, but you don't have a lot of permeability, you're going to hold a lot of water, but it's not going to move through. And so you got to be careful. There was a time when we were irrigating in the South Valley and the water table was so high that we were flooding the land, but then the water would just stay there. So there was like no permeability. Like, it looked like the soil was holding water, and then all of a sudden it was holding too much water and it was a pond. And then it wouldn't drain. So you want to think, okay, you want airspace in your soil and your compost, and of course the act of doing compost is going to create airspace. And then you want to see, maybe you want to get a jar and put water on top and see if it comes through. And that'll give you an idea, is water able to travel through my system? If it can't, you might be hard panned or you might have caliche in there. But the good news is no matter what your problem is, not a generous, but a modest application of compost over a period of time will start bringing your soils into better health. I think we go to the next slide.
So real quick, is this process of changing and adding in pre-soil life, which also creates then they create the glue that helps create the aggregates, right? Which are the pathways that start creating a healthier porosity and permeability. Is that kind of correct? Am I understanding that?
Yeah, if I'm understanding you correctly, as you're adding compost, all of these organisms, they're like their own ecosystem.
Right.
So like the fungi and the bacteria are gonna be releasing, different types of enzymes and different types of things, you can imagine mucus.
Yep.
And, as much as we don't like boogers, something like mucus inside the soil at a microscopic level is creating that structure, is creating water retention. We've got a better slide in a minute. That maybe is next. Okay, so this is what happened to our soils. Erosion, too much tractors, too much tillage, putting your soil through a blender. If you see any types of erosion, there's two types of erosion in your soil, real and sheet. Sheet erosion is kind of hard to see, but you can see the whole soil, like it rained and all the soil started to leave. Real erosion is easy to see because it looks like an arroyo. It starts to create a stream or a little miniature canyon. If you have this type of situation happening, you need to address it first. You should probably address that before you address your soil fertility, because if you don't address this situation, any soil fertility is going to wash away. So we'll talk more about that. That's where you want to get into no-till, or you want to get into, animal tillage or minimal till. I have a 10 horsepower tiller. But like when I do my early planting of my peas, fabas, garbanzos, and lentils, all those can be planted early, and garlic. And garlic is way early. And rye, of course, with rye and wheat, I will use my tiller. But with all the other row crops, I don't bother with the tiller. If my rows are already established and I'm happy with how it's laid out, to me, it's about the same amount of work to fork the soil.
Okay.
And just open it up, and that way you're keeping those layers intact, and then you put your compost on top. And then by putting your compost on top, and if you do that before you fork it and reshape your rows with the hole, you'll incorporate that compost enough, and then the snow and the rain will help mix it more and leach those nutrients into your soil, and you'll turn all your soil into healthier soil. But you got to address this situation first. But we'll talk about that. So let's go to the next slide. So that's just some statistics showing all the erosion, and they're patting themselves on the back because this is Natural Resource Conservation Service saying that they're addressing the situation. Okay. So, thanks for that data gathering, but by and large, we're actually using soil because of the type of agriculture that the government supports. If we were supporting more small farms, more traditional farms, okay, but by and large, even though it looks like the trend is going down, the farms are getting bigger and moving to other places, so the problem exists. You can go to the next slide. So here's the slide we were talking about, the soil food web and all the organisms. It's awesome to sit there and just imagine what it's like to be a microscopic spider or an amoeba or a nematode inside your soil. Take a minute to imagine that and connect with it. So you could see all the soil, you could see the sand particles are big, and the silt and the clay, you can barely see the clay. You could see the nematode, you could see a root in there. Your roots are creating a zone of life. You might want to think like me, when I harvest my corn and when I harvest stuff, I like to chop it and leave the roots in there. That way the roots are channels, and everything that was living on the roots can continue to live. And then as the roots decompose, it creates channels for the water. It's sometimes a hassle when you're trying to plant the next year and you got like these root balls in the way, but hey, I work around them because I'm trying to keep this soil food web going. Go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the nuts and bolts. Now we got the basic soil biology and all that, to think about. So the first thing you got to do, if you're going to start this agriculture thing, and of course, I not do this. It depends on what your system is. What's your system? If you're in a raised bed, okay, that's a raised bed. If you're on a field that's pretty much flat, maybe you aren't concerned about this. But like I say, if you have a slope and you're starting to see any type of erosion, and even if you're not, this is a good thing to do, is to identify the contour of your land, somewhere on your land. The contour is just where it's level. So if you find the contour, like if this was a contour, you pour water, it doesn't go that way, it doesn't go, it goes down, because this is level. So on your land, somewhere on your land is a level line. There might be several of them. It's like looking at a topographic map. So, if you're gonna do just one thing to improve your land, maybe you're busy, you're a commuter, you don't have time to garden, but you want to see stuff growing on your land, build a swale. Build a berm and a swale, so when there's extra water, and then figure out where the water is coming off of your roof and run it into your swale if you can. Connect all that up so you can have an accounting of where your water goes. If you just do that, and then you throw seeds in your berm or swale, there's all kinds of quelites, purslane, I'm seeing this food everywhere, even dandelion. Or what do you want? You could go after other crops, that you could even throw beans in there and just let them. But if there's a place for the soil and the water to stop and get collected, then that's what we're talking about. So watch, let's go to the next one. I hope that picture's clear about how we're doing it. And the next picture is showing the A-frame. So with an A-frame, all you need is 3 sticks, a string, and a weight. And you build an A-frame like that. And you get this A-frame, and you build an A-frame, and you put the string on top. I was gonna bring one, but I came with the kids, and we had the car all loaded up with recycling, and there wasn't room for the A-frame. But I think you can get it. You build an A, you hang a plumb bob, a string with the weight. And you put this A-frame on something that's not level, like I'll put it from here to here. It's not level. That's actually too dramatic, but from here to here. It's A-frame. The string goes like that, and there's a line. The line is right of center, right of level, because this isn't level. I put it on here and I put it up here, so it's not level. So the line's over here, so I mark that line. Then I turn the A-frame around and put it in exactly the same place it was. Now the line's on the other side of center. Are you with me?
Yep.
So now you have 2 lines on your A-frame. One when it was like this, one when it was like that. And level is halfway between those 2 lines. So you don't need a level, you don't need a ruler, you just need the A-frame and an unlevel area and a pencil or even a knife. And you figure out the level. And don't get overdone. You're not landing a rover on Mars. Right? You're trying to basically figure out where the level is. If it's 1/8 of an inch off, it isn't going to hurt you, because once you start figuring out where your contour is, and then you're going to tell the land where the contour is. You're halfway going to identify it and halfway tell the land how it's going to be. So you use that A-frame. And you say, oh, look, this is level. All right. So then you mark this. Then you flip that A-frame around. And you find where that goes in your center line. You go, oh, now level's over here. And you flip it around until you'll have this dotted line across your land. And if you don't want a line that looks like you were staggering dizzy, because I did that. The first time I did this from one end of my field to the other, it looked like I was a drunk bug. But what was important to me was to find this end that was level with this end. Even though the line went like this in between, I forced a half moon between those 2, and then that berm was big enough to, that's the level of my land. I knew that this end was level with this end 80 feet away, even though it took me a while to get there. And there's easier ways to do it. If you got a bucket, I did one, and then my friend showed up with a bucket with a 40-foot tube. And we did the next one by having a bucket up here and the tube over here on a ruler. And we put the tube and the ruler on the one ditch. And I said, oh yeah, it's at 16. Then I just made sure the tube didn't get stuck on weeds, and I walked way over there, since it was a 40-foot tube. I had, a good way that I could go. I went to the middle and I moved it around till it was back on 16 because the water level in the tube is water level on the bucket. So as soon as I found 16, I said, okay, this is level with the other 16, cool, flag it, and then I went to the other side. Trick is you don't move the bucket. Right? If it doesn't reach, you're screwed. You gotta leave that bucket there because that's the level you're working with, that water level. If you're a contractor and have a contractor's level or a transit, okay, well then you got a little more equipment than the average. Okay, so then we get into the building of the compost. Everybody has compost materials at their disposal. My number one compost material is cut the weeds and rake them up. 1 year, I cut about an acre of weeds. You can see this in my blog. If you go on my blog, Sol Feliz Farm, .wordpress.com, I think it's on the last slide. You can write it down. Or I can tell you that. But we made a pallet box. You know pallets? Pallets, man, start scavenging. It's gonna help you out. Right? You need 4 pallets to get a good compost system going. And actually you need 7. So now you have 2. So you can go from one to the other. And actually you need 10. So you could have 3. So you can store all your carbon in one, build your compost in the other, and stir it in this other one if you want. I don't stir compost. I don't have time for that. But my compost takes 3 years. If I wanted my compost in the summer, I'll stir it. So that's why it says fast, cheap, and easy right there. I do cheap and easy. Because on that triangle, you get 2 for anything you do in life. If for compost, if you want it fast and easy, it ain't gonna be cheap. You know, if you want it fast and cheap, it ain't gonna be easy. But I like cheap and easy. Okay, so that's how I do it. But like I say, it takes a long time. But I've been at this 20 years, so now it's starting to really pay off. You know, patience has paid off. So I'm gonna show you more about the compost, but basically you can see my pallet bin. I cut the weeds, and like I say, 1 year I was 100% weeds. Okay, I'm lying. I did get a truckload of sheep manure from my neighbor, and just a little bit because, as I'm going to tell you in a minute, weeds are green, and they're wet. You know, there's moisture in them. So green and wet means they're more nitrogen than carbon. If they were tan and brown and dead, okay, well, that's a different thing. But since they're green, I'm saying, you know what, there's a lot of nitrogen in there already. All I got to do is add water by bringing that into a pile. And we made a pallet box, 3 pallets wide and 2 or 3 across and 2 wide, filled with weeds over my head. You can see a picture of it in my blog. 2 years later, it was down here. I think in those 2 years later, I might have stirred it once, but I didn't stir it. And in fact, I think that might have been the compost that I was applying in my first picture, right? So if all you have is weeds, and I'm lucky because most of that's alfalfa. So alfalfa is already ready to go like that. Some people are going to tell you need to shredder it. Okay. If you have what it takes to shred leaves and shred all this stuff, but don't be like this lady who told me she was all stressed out about shredding her leaves because she took a workshop at NMSU, that she put all her leaves in a trash bag and started running over them in her truck. And then the plastic on the trash bag got tied up in the dry shaft, and it just turned into a big old hassle. And my answer to that was like, you know, just throw the leaves in there and let the worms and the bugs figure it out. I'm not, you know, now I kind of have a system. I'm going to try it. I use it with adobe construction. I mean, like adobes and mixing mud is I have a big barrel, 55-gallon barrel, and I'm going to experiment, put my leaves in there and using the weed eater, brush cutter weed eater. It works great with straw. I make an adobe. I turn my long straw into short straw. You know, wear hearing protection because I messed myself up. My ears are still ringing from that. So, you could shred all your stuff up, but basically you're looking at putting all this stuff in a place, and creating that ecosystem, so now everything can start moving along.
Can I ask a quick question about doing green weeds and stuff? Is there a problem with, after a certain point, obviously, it's even composted the seeds, correct? And so when you apply that compost, you're not re-getting weed seeds in that compost.
Yeah, if you get your compost going killer, and it's, and it's all about ratios and figuring out your recipe, kind of, and getting a feel for it. But you might need a compost thermometer if you want to get really good at this. And those are kind of pricey, but you could also get intuitive about it. There's times when I stick my hand in my compost and I go, whoa, that's way too hot, because it'll actually burn me.
Yep.
So if you stick your hand in your compost and it's warm, you could say nice. And you stick your hand in your compost and it's too hot, you go, okay, well, I got a situation over here. But if your compost gets above 125 degrees, which is pretty easy to do, if you have enough nitrogen in there and enough moisture, the bacteria creates that heat, it'll kill the seeds out, most of them. It'll bake them away, right? And but if you don't have that temperature, it won't do that. So you want it at a certain temperature. I know people who do biodynamics. I don't have the time for biodynamics. I can't pay attention. I'm paying attention to my kids' fights, not the stars and the planets. So I wish I could pay attention to the stars and the planets and tell me what to do. But with the biodynamic compost, man, if their compost goes above 125 degrees, they're tearing it apart. They do not let it get hotter than 130. Me, I check my compost and go, oh my God, this is 165 degrees. Don't touch it. See you in 2 weeks. I hope you chill out by then. But that's what I got. But what happens is if you're at that temperature, you got way too much nitrogen, right? So the nitrogen going to create the heat and the bacterial action. So in the next slide, there's that compost tumbler we were talking about earlier, and then the bin is for worms. We'll talk more about worms later, but here's a cool table from the Human Manure Handbook. So compost is all about carbon and nitrogen. And again, carbon is anything, that was alive, that is now dead, that is dry, tan, brown. It's going to be sawdust, sticks, dead weeds, leaves that fell off the trees, what have you. Nitrogen is anything that's wet, green, sticky, stinky. Manure is nitrogen. Fresh cut weeds are nitrogen. Rotten scraps out of your fridge when you clean your fridge is nitrogen. So then you're looking for the balance. If you do a search on the balance, they're going to say you need a lot more carbon than nitrogen. So what does that mean, ratios? If you didn't like ratios and fractions in school, this might be a traumatizing. But basically, when you see something like 20-1, that means you need 20 times more carbon than nitrogen. So then once I was at with this composting expert, and I said, is that by mass or by volume? And then they looked at me all confused. And I said, right. This is like how my grandma made tortillas. It ain't a recipe. It's like you gotta feel it. You gotta do it enough to say, yeah, this feels right, or this is gonna get stinky. And I know it. So, but if you were to get technical, I could say, 20-1. All right. I'm going to fill up 20 of these of leaves and throw it in my tumbler, and 1 of these of chicken manure, pure, fresh chicken manure. And I'm going to see how that works for me. That's where these tumblers are good things to figure out. You could get this thing going like an operation. You know, the best thing I've got is I got 5-gallon buckets and I got a 1-gallon bucket. So I could fill 4 or 5-gallon buckets with leaves and one gallon bucket with chicken manure and try that out. Again, I don't usually measure. Usually I'm saying, oh, I got a wheelbarrow full. I'm gonna throw it here. How much is that? Okay, I think I'll go get 2 gallons of chicken manure. Maybe 3. You know what I'm saying? It's just more nitrogen, I mean, more carbon than nitrogen, and everybody's gonna have their different number. If there's a difference of 15 there. So what's that telling you? That's telling you there's a lot of wiggle room in this thing. If you got a thermometer, you can get it locked down at what it takes to make 130 degrees. There's a cool table of what already has, everything already has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. The coolest one for me was cabbage. My wife used to make sauerkraut. When she would make a batch of sauerkraut, I would come out of there with boxes and boxes and boxes of leaves, the outside of the cabbage and the core of the cabbage. That's why my compost is off the hook. Because can you imagine being able to add boxes and boxes and boxes of cabbage scraps to your compost? I mean, I was adding like 2 feet of cabbage scraps. And then that is already at 12. So then I figured I was good there. I threw worms in there and let them do the work. You know, maybe I would have been smart to add more carbon. But you know, hey, I do what I can when I can, but it seems to be working, so I'm not overthinking it. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so building compost. Here's my little custom figure. Okay, so you need 4 pallets or some other container. You can make a wire basket. You can make a big, you could have a tub. I mean, what's your system? If you're in an apartment, maybe you're gonna go get one of these big tubs from Walmart and do your composting, you know, in your garage or in your house. You know, what's your context? So you need a bin. Like I say, I like 4 pallets. Then in this area, you need a moisture retainer liner. If you just use pallets, you're gonna be using a lot of water to keep that compost moist. So I like to line my pallets with big cardboards, like, you know, from the appliances. So I'm always like scoring old cardboards here and there. Like right now, I got one from a bookshelf and from a water heater. You know, if I don't use them for my compost, I'll use them for sheet mulching.
Do you make sure that there's no letters on the printed color or ink?
Yeah, you know, like I got, the last one I used was for a toilet. And yeah, you know, there was the outside printed on the toilet. I put that to the outside. And I put the blank side to the inside. So, you know, I always use what I have, but yeah, if you can use just regular brown cardboard with the black letters, you're good. But some of it's glossy, yeah, and that. But you know, like my wife was buying cabbage, and this cardboard is actually dipped in wax. And I've used that. And I did have thoughts, well, this is a petroleum product, you know, this good, but you know what, guess what? We're in a petroleum world, we're in a microplastic world. So I'm of the opinion that I'm creating the conditions for my bacteria and my fungi and algae to deal with all this stuff locally, because guess what, it's here anyways, whether you like it or not. So you might as well create a system that knows about it, that can deal with it to a certain degree. There's a farmer here, Don Bustos, who said, hey, if a little bit of oil from your tractor, your tiller gets in your soil, that's good. Oil will actually feed your bacteria a little bit. You're not gonna dump the whole quart of oil. You don't want drip, drip, drip. But you know, a drip here, a drip there, hey, bacteria can handle it, right? It's like you eating GMOs. You eat a little bit, you can handle it. If you live on that stuff, hey, you're gonna be wondering what's wrong with you all the time. So I like a moisture retaining liner. I use cardboard. Or, you know, I've heard of people using like a weed barrier, like a black cloth.
Roof tin.
Yeah, roof tin, anything to keep the moisture in. Or a shady area. Maybe you have a perpetual area that's always shaded. maybe, so then you can use that.
Okay.
But then you're gonna start building your compost, you need a source of carbon. You know, the best one is in the fall with the leaves. There's leaves everywhere. So if you can lock down your leaves, there's your carbon source. I have a 3x1 pallet box full of leaves from last year, stems.
And they're still dry?
I'm hoarding the carbon. So I call them my carbon caches.
Right.
So I have these carbon caches, and yeah, they're already getting rained on. They're getting the decomposition process started. But I have all the carbon I need I could build 3 or 4 compost bins right now if I have the nitrogen, which I do. When I clean out my chicken coop, I have 15 chickens. Clean out my chicken coop twice a year. That's the engine of my whole system. That's my main input, is chicken feed. Once I bring in the chicken feed, you know, back to that ecological model, the input is chicken feed. I already got the chickens. Now the chickens output the manure. The manure's the input to the compost with all my leaves. So that's the main input to my farm, is chicken feed.
So when you're considering the input of chicken feed, if you're getting chicken manure from someone else, how important is it to know what kind of chicken feed they're giving their chickens?
Yeah, I don't know how important it is. It's tough because, most people, I'm sure if they're buying chicken feed at Walmart, I'm sure it's GMO. And, I'm of the opinion, again, kind of like microplastics in petroleum. You're better off getting chicken manure that was fed GMO, especially if you've got a system where your bacteria and your fungi are happy to help break that down. Now, GMOs are tough because it could be said that GMO survived, the digestive tract and everything. And then if your bacteria sees it, they could be producing the GMO in their guts. And then all of a sudden you have BT pesticide in your compost. Theoretically that could happen. So yeah, that's why I'm an advocate, as much as you can do it yourself. I just bought 2 bags of scratch. It was organic. It cost me what, $44 or $53 or something for 100 pounds of scratch. And, and a lot of people say, oh, that's too expensive. Why? You can get it at Walmart for $10. But like I say, I'm not just buying chicken feed. I'm not just getting eggs. All that chicken manure going into my composting system. And when I bring in 100 pounds of blue corn this year, which I'm pretty sure I am, I help pay for it with that chicken manure. Part of that is, that's part of the expense. If you're getting it from somebody else, you might want to, I don't know, maybe make that compost really hot. And see if that, and there's also something to be said about intention. I mean, if you throw your good juju in there, you make some kind of offering or some kind of prayer. Hey, the jury's out on the science of that, but I'm convinced that stuff works. And we don't need to, get all into like the material reductionist science of it, as much as what is our relationship with it. And if you take care of the relationship, I think it'll reciprocate. And so yeah, you need your carbon, your nitrogen, again, your manure is your best. If you don't have access to manure, nitrogen could be kind of hard to come across. Except like I say, you cut weeds that are green, you look for muck if you can find some.
Quick question,
And
when the leaves start to decompose and they're all wet in the winter, does that then make them more of a source of nitrogen or? No, okay.
No, there's still carbon, but that's next on your list is your water, your moisture. Okay, so if your leaves are wet, the bacteria might have started taking them down, decomposing them. That's great. But then there's that moisture. So when you're building your compost, and this is impossible, I don't know, maybe it's not impossible. You could probably build your compost and put some kind of tube in it and pull it out. and see how moist it is, but to me, it's like my grandma made tortillas. It's like you say, oh, is this enough moisture? Maybe a little more. Let me check. A little more. Okay, that's good. And if you did too much, you're not gonna hurt anything. It's either gonna drain out or dry out. Because the next thing you're gonna do is aeration. And the best way to aerate, that's with the red. Okay, well, the way I aerate is I build up my compost, whether it's this full in the pallet or this full. I got a T-post, you know, the T-post where you make a fence. But on this T-post, the little wing fell off on the bottom. You know, it has a little wing on the bottom. You pound that, and then when the wing goes under the soil, you know you're deep enough. So I just have a metal pole, a T-post pole. I tied a string, a red string that tells me where's the top of the pallet. So I know how far I have to go. And then I use either a hammer or the T-post slammer. And I put that pole in my compost in the shape of a number 5 die. You know, you roll a die and number 5 has 1 in the middle and 4, a box on the outside and 1 in the middle. Because you want there to be some air source within a foot of all of your compost. So by doing a number 5 in your, if this was my compost bin right here, then I stick my T-post in the middle and I hammer it in and it goes through all that compost. And then once I get to the bottom, and I know because here's the top of the bin and here's my string, and I say, all right, I made it to the bottom, you know, I'm close enough. Then I just wear gloves and I open it. Then I pull it out and I put it in the one, do the same thing, pull it out, put it in the one, do the same thing. And there it is. I've seen other people get like PVC pipes or old chimney pipe and they put it in there in a template and they fill up their compost around it. And they let it sit there for like 3 days. And in those 3 days, the mycelium has already gone everything together. And then they just pull the pipes out and they have these semi-permanent channels. I don't have pipes like that, so I just use this T-post. But you know, you got to figure out how to get air into those bottom layers. So you're gonna make layers like a lasagna. And notice the bottom layer is coarse carbon. So all your other carbon sources can be leaves and stems and all this stuff. But on the very bottom, you might want to consider like your tree prunings or your garlic stems. Things that like that are going to lay on top of each other like pickup sticks. So air can get underneath. That way your bottom layer is a bunch of sticks and branches and all this stuff. You know, you can imagine air is able to get underneath your compost. Then you're putting these air vents in. So now you have air can flow through. And you have it contained in cardboard so it keeps the moisture. So you got the air flowing through, but you're retaining moisture. And then there's your compost. And let's see, did I get it all? Okay.
Good question. So these layers you have, these are the 20-to-1.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bottom layers 20, then the 1 for the 90,
Yeah.
and the 20 all the way. Okay.
Yeah, and it's like on the bottom layer, you can ignore it as your layer to a degree, right? Because when you tear your compost apart, there's still going to be sticks there and all this coarse carbon. So what you're going to do is put your coarse carbon on the bottom, and you can leave that out of your ratio if you want or not. Then put your regular carbon on top of that. So, you know, you have like, so stuff isn't just falling through. So then put your layer of leaves, then your layer of nitrogen, then another layer of carbon, another layer of nitrogen. In between each layer, you're moistening it. You want it to be the texture of a wrung out sponge, like as if you were to pick this stuff up, if you were a giant who could pick up your compost and squeeze it, you would squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, and at the very end, 1 or 2 drops would come out. So you don't want it soaking wet. You want it like a wrung out sponge. And then, yeah, but you just will know that that air is going underneath. Sure, question?
Well, I was gonna say, you said if you don't have manure, you don't have nitrogen, but if you're harvesting urine, that has nitrogen in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about, that's a big thing now is pea cycling and your bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, there's a good nitrogen source. And what you might wanna do if you're into that is either start saving your pea. That's how they're doing it in Vermont, the people I know that are piloting all this. You could save your pee in like a plastic jug for like 3 days and it'll sterilize itself. Or you can have a human manure system, which is what I've got, and you're peeing in a bucket of sawdust or leaves. And then you can use that in your compost system as your nitrogen. And then if you're peeing in sawdust and leaves, you're already introducing some carbon. So good luck getting an accurate count of your carbon to nitrogen ratio. But that's when you're saying, hey, does it smell? Does it feel good? Does it look good? Do I like it?
Well, he has it figured out enough. I mean, I'm following you handbook, so
Yeah,
it's somewhat practiced.
yeah, totally. And then you'll develop your own, because where he did the human manure handbook is a lot more humid than it is here. So then you're gonna think, oh, my carbon's gonna dry out faster, my nitrogen's gonna dry out faster. So that's why I like to line things. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Are the 4 pallets 2 and 2, or is
Yeah.
one side open? So it's right on the ground with 4 pallets?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how I do it. And then, you could think about putting a pallet on the bottom, because then that allows air to come up.
And would you put cardboard on the bottom if you did that? or
I
leave
wouldn't.
it- You leave it?
Yeah, because you want air to come in. But even if I put a pallet on the bottom, just to ensure the airflow comes through, I would still do a coarse layer probably.
And then,
I would still do like prunings, especially of like the red plums, the wild red plums have branches everywhere, but they easily break. So
and then a question about the urine. Is it important to, you're saying to put it in a jug for 3 days? Is that important rather than just putting it directly?
yeah, I think they're saying that, there has to be a sterilization process, especially if you're, a lot of stuff that you're eating, especially if you're on prescriptions or something, it'll come out in your urine. So I think that's a part of the process, the pasteurization process. And then we'll deal with it. Did you say fermentation?
It ferments, right?
Yeah.
The longer it sits, some people say the longer the better, but like a month,
Yeah,
you're safe.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and some people say, hey, just go, pee in the garden. It's sterile anyways, and if it's just you,
I've done both.
yeah. I mean, for like us and our family, we all know.
Yeah.
When we have visitors, it's like, okay, well, for all we know, these people are eating GMOs, or they're on birth control, or they're on,
Like you said, with the tractor oil a little.
yeah. So here's what mine looks like. Here, I brought this. This is my finished compost here. And, this is all stuff from my land. There is no dirt in here, it looks like it's dirt, but this is pure organic matter. And there's a lot of eggshells in here. Because like at this time of year, I'm getting 6 or 8 eggs a day. So I'm eating about 4 eggs a day. I eat a lot of eggs. And they say that's not good for you, but it's not affecting. I think it's better for me than other random stuff that, hey, a lot of burger. I think 4 scrambled eggs for breakfast is more healthy for me than a breakfast burrito from Lot Burger. Even if they say it's high cholesterol, and I do have insane cholesterol. And the doctor, he saw my cholesterol numbers and he was so concerned, he ordered like this heart scan. He was like, dude, you're in danger of a heart attack. And I was like, really? And I was like, and so I got the heart scan, and then the results came back and he said, dude, I've never seen anybody with your high cholesterol numbers, but your calcium numbers in your heart, you got an A+. So I'm eating all the butter, all the bacon fat, all the eggs I want. But for some reason, it's not getting into my heart.
It's more based, there's finding that it's more based on sugar consumption, processed sugar.
Okay.
And that's being the bigger issue than actual cholesterol issues
Yeah.
related to fat processing, but
Yeah, because I'm a believer in fat, of all kinds. It needs to go, there just needs to be more of it, more bacon fat, more, fat on the steak, all that stuff's good for you. It's a conspiracy. Because it's actually, yeah, it feeds your brain. I think they're trying to make us stupid by making us go low fat. I really, yeah. Yeah,
I've heard they're finding out that there's different kinds of cholesterol, like.
Yeah.
There's good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, it's not all bad.
yeah. Yeah, so anyways, there's a lot of eggshells in here and they say that's good because calcium, your fats need calcium, just like we do. So here's this, if you want to check it out,
Yeah.
that's coming from the wheelbarrow. This you can see on the right, that's one of my carbon caches. I had so much carbon in my other bin, I had to put another bin.
Is that a mealworm?
Yeah, there's probably, I'm sure there's worms in there. When I apply it, the chickens will make sure that that worm is taken care of. Notice on my screens, man, those screens is a good investment. In fact, there was a time when I was thinking I was gonna sell screens. And maybe I should get back into it because I still have a roll of that 1 inch. So depending, this compost, where'd it go? Okay, that compost there, I screened with a 1/4 inch screen.
Oh.
So that's why it's so fine. But it takes more time. I could have been happy screening it with the 1 inch screen. But what's cool about using a smaller screen is once you screen it, you have all this stuff that's partially decomposed. You'll still end up with some kind of zucchini stem in there that didn't decompose or a piece of bark that's got in there. Well, guess what? Now your good compost went in your wheelbarrow, all your coarse stuff sitting in the screen. I put the coarse stuff back in the compost.
Yeah.
Not only is it a carbon for your next round of compost, guess what? It's full of bacteria, algae, and fungi that's going to jumpstart your process. Yeah, so you don't have to get all overdone about these ratios and getting perfect compost, because if you're gonna screen it, then anything that hasn't composted, you're gonna put back in your compost. And everything that did compost will go through the screen, and there it is. So that's the live, I just took that picture last week because I'm top dressing my corn now with that. All that's going on top of my corn. And then when I put it and it's gonna rain, that's when I'm gonna go woo-hoo, because all the rain's gonna push the compost into the root zone. And then not only that, the corn's not gonna use it all. So then I'm gonna compost my fields for next year. Whatever I plant there is gonna benefit from the compost I put this year. I didn't even go to the next side because we're gonna get into now the worms. Okay, so here's my worms and worm compost. Unfortunately, I didn't get this thing prepared for you. I just brought some actual worm compost. And if you look in here, you can see there's some remnants of the bedding. So when you do the worms, you need worms, the red wigglers. So if you go fishing, you can go buy wherever you go buy worms for fishing. That can help get you started because worms will breed. Every worm is both, they're hermaphrodites, male and female. So they'll fertilize each other and then they'll both take off and lay eggs or cocoons. So, theoretically, you could start with 2 worms. If you want to go bigger time, I recommend wormwoman.com. She's the one who got me into worms, Mary Applehawk. And she passed on, and I'm happy to say I think her worms still live with me. She gave me my first worm bin. I don't use that worm bin anymore. She has the worm away worm bin, which is just fine. But I like the stacking system. I moved into the stacking trays, and it has a little spigot on the bottom where all the juice can come out. So I like the stacking trays. It's less maintenance. The other ones, it works just fine. I did the worm bin for 10 years before I moved into the stacking tray. So I had a student who made a worm bin out of 2 5-gallon buckets. The top bucket, he drilled all kinds of holes in, the smallest drill bit he could, just so all the juice could go into the second bucket. So he nested the bucket, so if there was too much moisture, it would drain into the second bucket. And the only thing he fed his worms, which is 90% of what I feed my worms, was coffee and tea grounds. You know, unfortunately, I am drinking coffee every day, tea, you know, some days. But yeah, that's another input to my system. If I was to look at my system, one of the main inputs would be chicken feed and coffee. Because the coffee is really feeding my worms. One dude told me, don't give your worms coffee, they get anxiety. I was like, well, as long as they eat them, you know, I got anxiety too. You know, but I'm still trying.
In your stacking system, are you catching juice on the bottom?
Yeah. Yeah,
Worms
so
can migrate through the holes, right?
they can. And but the way I got my system set up is when I stock them, I put a pinch of worms in each one. So, you know, like I'm getting ready now because apples are starting to fall off the trees and we're gonna go after the apples, but we can never get them all. I'm gonna get all my apples, all the rotten fruit I can't handle, put it in a 5-gallon bucket. I'm gonna chop it up with a flathead shovel. I'm gonna mix it with leaves and weeds and fill one of those trays to the top. At the same time that I'm doing that, I'm gonna process the trays from last year. Last year, you know, I stacked 12 or 13 trays, no, 10, because I kept 3 in my garage for my coffee grounds. And I stacked all these trays full of rotten chopped up apples and plums, you know, that I couldn't handle. And then I mixed them with leaves and weeds and all this stuff that fell off the trees. And then I processed the worms. You know, when I made this tray stack system at the end of the winter, you know, I was able to turn those 10 trays and consolidate into 2 trays, 2 fat trays, almost overflowing. I should have used 3 actually. Consolidate. So now I'm letting those finish. When those ones finish, here's the trick on, see the tarp? Is you're gonna lay out a tarp. This is what I couldn't do because it's too cloudy, right? You want a hot sunny day. So you're gonna build your worms, feed your worms, and as your worms go, did I toss it around? Did you all see that? So there's some worms in there. And then you get all I get the whole tray, I get a plastic tarp, just a little piece of plastic, boom, dump it out, shovel everything out that's stuck. And make a little volcano of worm castings out of worms. The worms don't like the sun, so they start going away. So I come over here with my bucket and a little trowel, and I start scooping the compost off the top. I start skimming, shaving the volcano, throwing it into the bucket. Then lo and behold, there's a worm. Okay, now I stop. I go do something else for an hour or 2. The sun is beating on this hill. The worms are like, I gotta get away from the sun. They go further and further to the center. So then I come back again an hour or 2 later, scoop off all the compost on the top. I take down another ½ inch or an inch, and then I see a worm. Okay, stop. And eventually, sometimes I'll throw a worm in there and go, hey, rescue mission. Right? Put you back. Or sometimes they stay there. And I go, well, you know, I guess you're gonna have a new home. I hope you do. You know, chickens are probably gonna get you. But yeah, rescue mission, put them back, then come back a couple hours later, keep doing that. And it takes about a full day if I really pay attention, you know, and I'll end up with like a gallon or 2 of worm compost and a ball of worms, a meatball of worms. So then that's where this gets, you know, you gotta like schedule it because you don't wanna have a ball of worms like that and nowhere for it to go. So that's why it's all timing. So when I process my worms, that same day at that same time, I gotta be either building my next worm bin or I gotta be building my outdoor compost in my pallet system. You know, so these worms have some place to go. And then of course, a pinch always goes to my chickens. one at a time with me messing with their minds. It's pretty fun.
Okay,
And,
so that's just how you get the compost, how you sort it,
yeah,
sift it.
yeah.
Okay, that's
So you can have your compost and your worms separate
nice.
and perpetuate your worms.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, to raise your worms, you're gonna need, here's the bedding. This is just newspaper. I work at a school. And the schools have all these newspaper pamphlets, how to take the ACT, how to take the SAT. And then they just threw them all in the trash. And I was like, well, that's perfect newsprint. I don't want newspaper that's glossy and has all kinds of glossy colors and pictures and all this stuff. Some people will even shred their junk mail, plastic and all. I'm gonna try that one of these years. I'm gonna try and do junk
Maybe they
mail
can
and
transform
glossy
it.
in one tray and see how it works. Again, with the idea that this stuff is happening on the earth, I gotta like process it myself locally. I'm part of the problem. I need to like deal, instead of exporting all my junk mail, trying to figure out how to, maybe I could work with it. I don't know, but for now, what I like is just basic newsprint. So your newspaper, except for the advertisements in the middle, is good enough, you know, and, but man, this was perfect because it was only green, black, and, purple ink. And it was, you know, all newsprint. So I ran it through a shredder, like an official shredder, and I actually burned out my shredder. It like stopped working, and I was like, oops. I was like, it said I could put 12 sheets at a time. I was like, come on. I didn't put more than 12, or did I? And so then I went the manual method. You know, newsprint has an axis where it'll go in strips like paper mache. So, you know, every time, what I do is, you know, I have a little bucket on my counter for all my worm. I have different buckets on my counter. I have one that says chickens. So that's rotten food. I'll throw it over the fence and the chickens will eat it. I have one that says compost. This is stuff that I don't think my chickens will necessarily eat, but I can put in my compost. Things like broccoli stems, you know.
Okay.
My chickens will eat the broccoli, but the broccoli stems are like, really, dude? You know, what do you want me to do that? You know, or so, yeah, so you can make a determination. Does this go to the chickens? Does this go to the compost? Of course, you don't have chickens, they all go to compost. Then my next tub is the worms. That's my coffee, tea, and this is my favorite. I love it when I make atole,
Oh.
right? Then you always end up with the crusty cornmeal on the sides. You know, hey, I scrape all that and that goes in my worm tub. And I'm just like, yeah, that's like the perfect deal, because where it says rough food, rotten, like to jumpstart your whole system, they say the best thing you can do is throw a tablespoon of cornmeal in there. Of course, natives know that, you know, cornmeal can make everything better. So, you know, anybody knows that who likes food, but yeah.
It's got that grit on the end.
Yeah, and then the grit, that's gonna be dirt. Because worms are the first animals to have a gizzard, like a digestive tract, but they don't have teeth. So they use little microscopic grains of sand in a muscle in a gizzard and they grind up their food. So you gotta make sure that's in your bin. Throw in a handful of just dirt from anywhere. You know, they won't care. And AIRE, like you could just get a bin from Walmart and raise worms in it, but you're gonna have to make sure that the bottom doesn't get putrid, because there might be liquid that forms in there. That could be a problem. It'll use up the oxygen. It could get putrid. So if you don't get one of these official worm bins that has vents and, you know, jungle gyms for the worms and all this, you know, you can just get a tub at Walmart, not a clear one because they don't like light, right? So get a black one if you can, or one that's not, where light's not gonna get in. And you can, you know, tear up your bedding, fill it up with a bunch of shredded newspapers and start burying your coffee grounds and your banana peels, if you have banana peels and you want to take the time, chop them up first. You know, the smaller the materials, the better. That's why, for me, I'm not gonna chop up banana peels. I'll throw that in my compost bin. But my coffee, my tea, my cornmeal, you know, when I have a corn grinder and I grind wheat, I grind buckwheat, I grind all my grains as much as I can, and there's always that mess there, so I just give it to the worms, you know, and for me, it's just it's like, you know, you could almost just throw it outside or throw it in the trash, but you throw it in the worms, hey, man, the worms are like, oh, you know, because they like that. And, okay, so I think we go to the next one. So compost tea, whether you got your compost bin, compost, or you got your worm compost separated, this is not separated, the worms are still in there, you know. These guys are like, what's going on? And then tonight I'm gonna dump them back in the bin and they're gonna be all, dude, where were you today? They're like, I don't even know, bro. It's like, I was like in a bag and then there's all kinds of talking and now I'm back here. But whether you got worm compost or you got regular compost, and for me, it's both, then you can make the compost tea. So this is a good deal. And you could do it fancy, get yourself some type of tea bag. Get yourself a tea bag, you know, and the best tea bag is gonna be like old pantyhose. Or actually the best tea bag that's easiest, because I asked my mother-in-law for her old pantyhose, and that was kind of weird. And you know, but she was cool. And but then I discovered you can go to Ace, to the hardware store, and there's paint strainer bags. Like there's some people who are like such professional painters, they spray the paint, and they have paint sprayers machines.
Yeah.
Well, you buy these paint sprayer bags that fit in a 5-gallon bucket, and they come in a 2-pack. So there's a tea bag if you want to spend some money. If you don't want to spend money, maybe you have some old pantyhose laying around.
Or
Even the guys,
a shredded t-shirt, huh?
yeah, maybe a t-shirt.
Kind of beat up.
Yeah, I heard of some old guys that have pantyhose because they used to like to wear them instead of thermal underwear when they go hunting. They'll never tell you. But there's guys out there who wear pantyhose, you know, and but yeah, cheesecloth. Yeah, cheesecloth. You can make a bag. Burlap would work, I think. You know, but I use those paint strainer bags from Ace or nylons, and then you put your compost in it. Then you fill a 5-gallon bucket with water. The best water you can use is rainwater. If you're harvesting your rainwater, you're in good shape. If you got a well, you're in good shape. If you're using community water or city water, put it in the bucket and let it sit.
Yeah.
You can also add uric acid back in, right?
Oh, yeah?
I believe so, yeah, uric acid, which is actually the coloration that you see coming off of the compost tea there. That coloration is actually uric acid. And you can add that in after you let it gassed off.
Oh,
And it's a little bit more like rainwater or natural water when it goes into the system, so.
interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you're gonna go the route where you're gonna use electricity, you can have an aeration pump, like an aquarium pump. An aquarium pump would be like, what, $15, maybe $20 now post-COVID, you know, or 25 or something. You can go that route. They're getting cheaper.
Yeah, one more.
Oh, yeah? Okay, so you might want to do that for $10 and then you're using electricity. But another way that I've been doing it is I've actually eliminated the bag, eliminated the pump, and I just put the compost in the bucket and stir it with a stick. And I'm intentional about it. I stir it with a stick 100 times this way. And then while I'm going this way and I got this vortex going, and I do reverse the direction, I go 100 times this way. Then I dump the whole thing through a screen, put it in a watering can, use the watering can right away on my rows. And then I have all this extra muck compost, and then I top dress my crops with that. And I figure that's good enough. But I used to get into the whole bubbling thing. 24 hours, bubble it. So every 12 hours, add a little dash of molasses if I want carbon for bacteria, or add nitrogen if I want more fungi. If you're growing trees, you want fungi. If you're gonna compost tea your orchard, you want fungi, you want it more heavy nitrogen. If you're gonna do your crops, you want more bacteria, right? Bacteria is more like a grassland type of situation, dominated. So then, you know, you might want to put molasses. Again, interestingly, the molasses I have says this contains chemicals that are gives California cancer or something. And I was like, well, that's weird. And you know, so I'm just wary of buying anything anymore. I'm always trying to figure out how do I do this without plugging it in, without buying it, and still having the same effect. So that's how I do it. But one of the masters of soil building is Bob Pedersen, and he's doing bubbling. He's bubbling and feeding. So if you were to do that, hey, you know, that's cool. Me, I don't take the time to do that. Did you have a question?
I have a couple questions. So with the method you do now, do you let it sit at all in the sun or anything, or you just put it together and strain it right away?
Yeah, I'll let it sit, you know, I figure like it like gets to know itself and, you know, but not like overnight or, you know, I've done it in the morning and then applied it in the afternoon, but I didn't leave it in the sun.
I left the bucket in the sun this morning.
Yeah,
And then for the sugar, is like adding apricots, because I have an overabundance of apricots. Is that something that you could do for the sugar source?
yeah, and in fact, you might be doing something else that I'm gonna talk about in the last slide.
Okay, I also have another question about the apricots, because I've been picking up 200 pounds a day of apricots. It's a lot. But, you know, because the pits, so you couldn't feed all of those to your worms, or could you? And what would you do with 200 pounds of apricots a day?
Yeah, you know what?
Yeah. Bring some to Beverly Hart, some of the places that distribute food.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, but a lot of times if they're bruised or they fell on the ground. You know, so yeah, a couple of things I've done is I've laid them out in areas where I want an apricot hedge and just cross my fingers that they'll come out.
I don't want any more apricots.
So then you can compost them all,
Okay,
and then you're gonna want to try and screen those out.
screen the seeds out.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, if you have a small enough screen, like a 1/2 inch,
Mhm.
you know, if you have an inch screen, like the one I showed on the left, you know, the seeds will probably fall through. But if you have a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch screen,
Okay.
you'll catch all those seeds. And then you probably just want to be intentional, because like me, when I'm screening my stuff and the stuff that doesn't come through, I put it back in the compost. But you might want to say, well, this, you know, I don't want to necessarily put these seeds back in the compost because they might even germinate, you know, and which might actually be a good thing, because then you'll compost the, you know, if you don't let it grow into a full-fledged tree, you're composting something that's sprouted. And maybe that would be a good thing, you know, and then maybe it would break the seeds apart, and that would provide organic matter to your system. You know, and permaculture, we like to say the problem is the solution, so.
Yeah, but I've heard that the kernels can treat cancer in Chinese medicine. And also, if you crack them open, there's like an almond inside, they're edible.
I've been doing that and extracting it, but it's too much to process.
Yeah, it sounds labor intensive. Maybe you got like some kind of appropriate technology or something. Okay, I think the next slide is the biochar. So there's all this hubbub on biochar. They're finding out like the rainforest, they think now that the rainforest was actually a cultivated garden by the indigenous people. And the reason is because there's like a 100-fold increase in biological diversity in areas where they find charcoal, and they find all the operation of how these indigenous people were making charcoal in the rainforest, because the rainforest soils aren't that good. And so, biochar is starting to become a thing. So here's the biochar I make. And, and I'm making it Actually, this is an older slide. I used to make it in a paint can. But after making biochar like what, 30 or 40 times in that paint can started to deteriorate. And then I got the idea, actually, it was a comment on my blog, that was cool, is I'm using a number 10 Dutch oven. So the Dutch oven lid is heavy enough, I believe that, it doesn't let oxygen in as much as it lets oxygen out, as the whole thing is biocharing. Is that a word? So when I'm biocharing, here's a corn cob. So what's happening here is look at all the surface area on this corn cob. If you put this in your soil, it's actually gonna rob your soil of moisture and organisms, because this is dry. So if you're doing biochar, you need to inoculate it. So what I do is I get about 4 times as much as this. I put it in a 5-gallon bucket with the vermicompost and my compost, and I vortex it. Then I apply that liquid, to my garden, to my tomatoes in my hoop house or whatever. And then what's left over, biochar and mixed in with the compost. Now this is perfect to apply to your soil. The best thing you can do is apply it underground. Right? If you can open up the earth and put it inside the ground as if you were planting seeds, that's your best situation. And get it underground, because then what's going to happen is all the fungi and bacteria that's in and enzymes that is in your worm compost and your compost is now living in this. This is almost like an apartment complex for microorganisms. It's like a little city. It's like a metropolis. So, you inoculate it first, you put it in your soil, and then this is jamming, because this creates aeration, it creates water retention, it creates water absorption, release, so this is the big deal now. Everybody's trying to figure out how to get biochar at scale.
Right.
But like I said, most people that are making biochar are plugged into the energy grid somehow, and it's a net loss. It's not a sustainable industry, but I'm pretty certain that making it, and I'm trying to figure out how to go solar, use a solar oven or something. I don't know if that's possible. I'd like to learn more about it and see if it's being done or how it's being done. But like I say, the way I'm doing it is 2 ways. One is using a number 10 Dutch oven and pot holder mitts to put it in my wood stove before I go to bed in the winter. I put it in my wood stove with the fire going. While the fire has died down, we're all going to sleep. That's the last thing I do. Put the Dutch oven in the wood stove, put in a couple logs so the fire goes at night and makes the charcoal, keeps my house warm, gives me some coals for the morning. Then I'm the one who goes first thing in the morning, pulls the Dutch oven out with the mitts, leaves the lid on in case it's smoldering. If you take the lid off, it could actually start on fire. So you leave the lid on so no oxygen gets in there. And then you can rekindle your fire and you have your fire for the morning. And then when it cools down, I dump out the biochar into a grain sack, because like I say, that's the input to my system. And then I make another batch the next night. So these are all my corn cobs, garlic stems, garlic seed. You know what I do? I make charcoal out of my garlic seed. Most people cut off their scapes because they think, it'll make bigger garlic. I leave my scapes alone, except for, a couple batches of pesto. But for the most part, I let my garlic seed head. But I biochar all my garlic seed, and then I feed it to my chickens.
Yeah.
So my chickens are eating charcoal, and then their manure has charcoal in it.
So you just make a little batch at a time,
Yeah.
whatever will fit in your one.
Yeah, it's about that much,
Okay.
And you can tell it works because like in the paint can, I put a hole in it and it shoots flames out. Those are all the gases from the charcoal making process getting combusted on the way out. And when I do the Dutch oven, the flames are coming around the rim. because the gases are coming out, and as soon as they escape, the fire catches them on fire, and it makes like pretty blue and green lights. Things like that.
What can you and can't you put in for biochar?
I don't know, I'm just pretty much exclusively using, oh, and I forgot to say, if you make chicos in the horno, right, that's the environment for making charcoal. As soon as you mud up the horno, and if you have fire still in there, because you're making chicos, and you mud it up the horno, so now oxygen isn't getting in. So all the wood that's left is going to cook like the chicos and turn into charcoal. And that's what some of these pieces are. So if it's like about this big and it looks like charcoal,
That was
yeah,
from
and another cool thing that I've done it before too, just randomly, like if I used up all my corn cobs and I still had space, I went to my wood pile and I found some cedar sticks, some cedar branches, and so anything that's of a reasonable diameter, if it's too big, then it's not gonna charcoal all the way through. So you wanna have it, about as big as a corn cob, more or less, or smaller. All my garlic stems charcoal real nice, all my garlic seed charcoals up real nice. And but I think almost I've thrown wood bark, like when I'm doing a batch and I don't have the space, I just find stuff that I think will work good as charcoal, so I'm assuming bark is good too. And if you think of like bark and pine needles and wood, our soils are alkaline, and most of all that stuff is acidic. So then, you're doing multiple benefits by using these local materials and putting them in your soil. Like right now, I have a big pile of wood chips that I raked up. I'm gonna run all those wood chips through the screen. And all the big pieces, I'm gonna go throw out in the field to be mulch. In a part of the field where we walk a lot and there's a bunch of weeds, I'm just gonna throw the big pieces of bark in the field. But everything that goes through the 1/4 inch screen is gonna end up in my field on these burns in the hugelkultur. I think that's the next thing I'm gonna show you. So yeah, that was my main deal. This is the last slide, because there's other things to talk about besides just composting, or that work in conjunction with compost to improve your fields, to improve your whole situation. So one is sheet mulching. I don't do too much sheet mulching, because what bugs me about sheet mulching is you got to figure out how to get the moisture under your sheet mulch.
Right.
And, and I think it can be done, with drip lines and such. I just haven't done it. But there's recipes for sheet mulching, which basically involves laying newspaper and compost and manure and cardboard on the ground in different ways, in different layers and configurations.
So there was a question in the chat,
Yeah,
saying, are you lighting the corn cob on fire inside the Dutch oven before you put the lid on and into the fire?
no, watch, go back to the last slide. Let me explain that a little more. So on the left, I put the corn cobs in the can, the stems, the seeds, just in the can, seal the can, and put the can in the wood stove. And so the only thing I lit was the fire that's in the wood stove, but the heat on the outside of the can, inside the wood stove, is what's gonna turn that raw corn cob into a piece of charcoal. So I hope that answers the question.
Does that answer your question, Rebecca? Said,
Oh,
"Thank
cool,
you."
is that Rebecca?
They said, thank you.
Nice. Okay, so now we can go back to the last slide. So there's sheet mulching. I'm trying to get into, I'm gonna combine my sheet mulching activity with my hugelkultur activity. Hugelkultur is this thing, you can look it up. It's a German word, a German technique, and they dig out this huge area and they fill it with wood, and then they put manure on top of the wood, and then they put the dirt back, and they have soil fertility for like 20, 30 years. And the way they put the trees will actually suck moisture out of the ground and bring it to the surface, because a tree log is basically a pump. And if you think of it like that, if you put the trees standing up, they'll bring moisture from the subsurface to the top. So it's a real ingenious system. It doesn't work for me in the desert because can't be digging like that. I don't have any equipment, and I like digging as much as I like digging. I don't want to dig like that. So I do a modified desert hugelkultur. You could see I've made a line in my field on the contour. That's on the contour. My rows used to go like this. You can kind of see the remnants of the rows going from, perpendicular to the road, but I found the contour. That's why my rows are now like this. So when I found the contour using an A-frame and that water bucket method, then I drove my tiller on the contour using the hiller furrower, and I made my trench. Then I was able to score a bunch of wool from my neighbor's stomach, the sheep wool on the stomach. She didn't want that wool because it had dreadlocks and manure and stuff in it. She sold the backs to the weavers, but all the stomach wool she sacked and was gonna throw away. She gave it to me. I made a wick across my field out of sheep's wool. Then I covered it with all those branches or prunings from my fruit trees. Then I covered those branches. I made kind of like the layers in the compost bin. I covered those branches with pure chicken manure. Then I covered all that with finished compost to inoculate the whole process. And then I put the dirt back on. Then now every year when I clear the fields and cut the weeds, I rake the weeds onto that berm, and the berm is getting bigger. And now, like I say, I'm gonna sift through all these wood chips, so I put all my scraps on that berm. Eventually that berm is gonna decompose, and when I irrigate, I flood irrigate, it goes up to the berm. It theoretically soaks into the wool, keeps that area moist, gets that whole situation going. I'm gonna keep building this thing up for 3 to 5 more years, and then I'm gonna start planting it. And I'm gonna put my calabazas, my squash right on top, and then I'm gonna put a drip line if there's no water right on top. Right now, I'm growing peas and garlic on the edge. The peas will grow fine, I think, as well, because they make their own nitrogen, right? So if they don't have enough nitrogen, they'll make it. So, that's what I'm calling a modified desert hugelkultur. That's using the terrace and this kind of thing. Sunken worm bins using milk crates. Man, I ran into this woman and she told me that in her hoop house, she dug out a square and stuck a milk crate in there. The milk crate lip is about 1 inch above the soil, but that's her worm bin, and it's underground. And the worms, she throws all her scraps in this milk crate, and the worms process all of it. And then she scoops out all the compost in the worms. She has a little plywood cover that she puts on top so it doesn't dry out. But man, I thought that was ingenious. Bury boxes or milk crates, it takes advantage of the moisture in the soil. It takes advantage of the temperature. The worms like it because they're in the ground dwelling and all that. And then it's pretty easy to throw stuff in the milk crate for the worms to eat. And then it's fairly easy to scoop everything out to process it. So I really like that. Fermented weeds. What's that book? Jadam? I'm not sure. I'm sorry. If you email me and remind me that I told you this book, but there's this method, I think it's coming out of Korea.
Bokashi.
Maybe.
It's the fermented version of,
Yeah, so they're saying that you get all the weeds that are on your field, that the weeds are indicating, your soil quality, and you harvest up these weeds and you put them in a bin and you ferment them. And what's that? Just leaving them there to rot, basically. And then you apply all that to your soils. And that actually creates the bacteria, the nutrients, and the ecological processes that you need. So, earlier I was talking about sauerkraut, my wife, into gut health and all this, well, that's, soil could be considered in some ways like a gut. and it needs, beneficial bacteria, it needs, fermented substrate like we do. We need to keep our digestive tracts inoculated, we need to inoculate our soils with these beneficial bacteria and microorganisms. So I haven't gotten too much into that. I do have a book and I perused through it. And I know they're doing workshops in Southern Colorado on it. Just like I heard of a workshop they did on the hugelkultur, but they use big machinery for their hugelkultur, but theirs was like 200 feet long or something. And then they went all out. Human manure and pea cycling. So there's a lot of these people in Vermont are really getting into pea cycling, and they actually were in the New York Times, and they're doing research in Africa and helping, because the people in Africa, like everywhere, need food and they're hungry, but it's harder for them to get materials like compost and all this. So they started doing research on how much nutrients urine has in it. That urine has everything that is needed for plants. It's almost like the perfect reciprocation. You eat and live and create waste, and then the waste is used by your garden. So that's where you get into human manure, where you can compost your poop even. And there's different ways to do that. Will Bonzall wrote a book. And what's the book called? But that's his main soil fertility program. Of course, he also has a forest. He's bringing in all these wood chips, from his forest, and he's chipping all this stuff, but he mixes it with his manure. And that's his main soil fertility. So, there's a lot of, what do they call them? Fecal phobes in America, but if we could get over that and start using our waste, it would be a good thing. The pea cycling, like we were talking earlier, they're actually creating a whole system where they're retrofitting people's houses they're retrofitting the toilets to separate the urine from the feces, gathering the urine in tanks and coming up and picking it up and pumping it into their big tank. And they have subscriptions, and they're harvesting thousands of gallons of urine and applying it on this farm, and this farm is off the hook. Like, I saw a picture of the chard, and the chard was like, it was like, 4 feet tall. It was like, it looked like, from Land of the Lost or something. It's like, what is that? It's like chard. It's like, dang, one leaf could feed like 4 families. Especially for the way my kids like chard.
I would assume you would need like healthy manure or healthy food, right? Not just like if you're eating like fast food every day.
Yeah, that's been a thought of mine too, especially because I have a composting toilet. And when I have visitors, and I'm using, and I have my human manure system, but my human manure system has been locked down for like, I want to say like 6 years before and I'm not even applying it yet. It's going to be locked down another year or two before I get to it. So, in the human manure handbook, if you do it just right, he says you could use it like in a year. Me, I'm not doing it just right, but I'm waiting 5 or 6 years. So I'm like, because I have all these other opportunities in compost. So I just say, hey, the human manure is there when I need it. And when I apply it, I'm going to apply it to my trees and my flowers. I'm not going to put it in my lettuce bed, okay? Maybe I'll put it in my corn, but like I say, I wouldn't put it in my radishes or my garlic, because it's still kind of like, but Jenkins, who wrote the human manure handbook, man, he's playing in his human manure, he's eating tomatoes, man, he's showing that, there's no reason to be afraid if you're doing it right. So, but me still, I'm saying, okay, well, I'm gonna apply my human manure to my trees and to things that are not necessary, you know, contamination can't pass up, the trunks of trees. It can't even make it to the top of the corn or to the sunflower. All the contamination will get arrested on the way when incorporated.
Okay.
So, you know, lettuce and like radishes is a different thing, right? Because, you know, it's close to the ground, even water, rainwater could splash, and if there was any parasites or anything. But yeah, it's definitely something to consider. But again, back to the basics of the compost. If you're really paying attention to your compost and you bring up that temperature to 125, 130 degrees, you're gonna kill all those parasites. You know, and yeah, it could be said that if somebody's eating fast food every day, they got GMOs and they got preservatives and, you know, and maybe if they're on medication, there's that too, you know, so yeah, it's an issue, but it's like, you know, those contaminants will either end up on your field processed in a sustainable, intentional way, or they're gonna end up in the Rio Grande, you know, south of the city, because, you know, you thought flushing it got rid of it. So again, you know, I would be like, if I had the time to manage it all, you know, I would say, hey, you know, it's better to process, you know, Taco Bell feces on my land than to flush it down the toilet. You know, if I'm processing it right, because I know they're not, all they're doing is hitting it with, you know, chlorine and then dumping it in the river. There's so much more we could be doing with that. In fact,
Right?
finally, the scientists are saying, oh, guess what? If we were to look at our sewage treatment plants as potential energy and a fertilization generation, we could really be sustainable. And I was like, really? It's taking you till 2022? I was like, I have a bachelor's degree in biology, and we were talking about that in the mid-90s. You know, and you guys are still hitting everything with Clorox. You know, but okay, well, at least they're thinking of it now. But yeah, I'm saying every sewage treatment plant, yeah, solar, wind, okay, but guess what? Fart power. It's like all of us have methane, you know, and we're just dumping it in the river or collecting it. We could turn every sewage treatment plant into a biodigester. They're doing it in Arizona. They got one in like it's somewhere in Arizona. I saw it, a biodigester where you get all the waste, you digest it, you capture all the methane. Then everything that comes out of it, you can run it through worm systems or fungi system and deal with it without having to hit it with chemicals and dump it in the water. We have the techniques.
What do they do with the methane?
Burn it.
Burn it,
Right.
yeah.
Burn it up?
It's
Burn it
biogas, yeah.
for fuel, yeah.
Okay.
I saw a small scale. There was this guy living over here in Los Ojos in a little trailer, like in a little camper trailer. And he had just a small flock of sheep, and he would get the sheep manure, put it in a 55-gallon drum, and put a lid on it, cook it with charcoal. He built a fire with charcoal, cook the sheep manure, and he had this little fitting and a tractor tire tube. And he was cooking the sheep manure, generating methane in a tractor tire tube, hooking it up to his trailer and cooking his food with and he just had to like retrofit his little propane burner to run on butane or something. He had to do these tweaks. And then he told me, yeah, bro, it sounds sustainable, but you gotta watch out with this tube because it can explode. He's all, I messed up once. I'm lucky I just lost my eyebrow. So yeah, there are some considerations. I saw another design of turning 2 gas tanks and about $100 worth of fittings from the hardware store, and you could turn your own toilet into a biodigester, if you have the space under your bathroom to do that. And so yeah, there's a lot of solutions of using our waste. Agriculture and building soils is one of them. So I think that's my last slide, and my next slide should have my contact information. Okay, I have growfarmers.org right there. That'll get you to my website, which is solfelizfarm.wordpress.com. But Grow Farmers will get you there, I'm pretty sure. If not, you, is there a marker? I'll write it down to just make sure. Yeah, this is for sure how you get me. And my blog is outdated. I haven't published anything since COVID. But I'm hoping to change that, like big time, because I really want to write an article now for the regional food system, Green Fire Times. I haven't published in Green Fire Times in 2 years. But the last time I published in Green Fire Times, UNM Press asked me if they could put that chapter in one of their books that's coming out in February. So I'm like, that's a good gig for me to write for Green Fire Times, because it leads to bigger things. So I better do that. So, and then once I publish something, I put it on my blog. Like the last article I wrote, there was the Green Fire Times version, but I put my version, which is, my version is twice as long. I had to chop it in half so it fits in Green Fire Times. And so yeah, this is where you could get me, and that's my email. And again, that's a picture on my south field distributing compost. You know, it's kind of a tedious job, and but man, it's real satisfying knowing, you know, that year was garlic, that you know, that the stuff you're eating came from your soil, your efforts, and is the best quality that there is. Really, there's no better feeling. Like, you know, now that I grow my own atole in Chaquewe, I can't get it anywhere else. Nothing compares. There is no atole that touches what I get to eat weekly, you know, because I know exactly what mine is and how it was done. You know, like that bueno atole, forget it. That to me tastes like plastic. Doesn't even taste. You know, mine is like, and yeah, in fact, I'm out. My corn better do good this year. I got 8 rolls of blue corn that has to last me 2 years. Because next year I'm doing white corn for chicos. Because we'll have an orno by then. We're halfway done with the normal. And I only have enough land to grow one kind of corn a year. But yeah, is there any more questions? I think, I hope I'm right on schedule.
Yeah, just a quick one. I just moved here, so this year I'm pretty much harvesting all my weeds. That are on the little bit of land I have. How long can they sit before they turn into the carbon? I mean, I've got some spread out. Do I just go by how dry they are?
Yeah, so you want to turn all those weeds
Yeah, I've
into
got tons
compost?
of nitrogen that I want, but I need to get more carbon. So I've just been drying them out, you know, as I'm pulling them. Is there a certain amount of time you need to sit, or I just judge it by?
And you didn't feel like cutting your weeds and composting them right away, that they have their own nitrogen in there, because all the carbon is there. And now when they're fresh.
I've got several stacks.
Yeah,
So I was trying to dry some out to add as carbon. Should I just make the stack big and call it good?
yeah, that's what I would do. I would consolidate all of that, you know, make a big pallet box, you know, and the trick is adding the water. So, you know, as you're consolidating it in layers, add the moisture and then just let it do its thing. And then if you get one of these sifters, you know, if you pile it and make it moist, you know, and then you take the time, like if you built a box here and you built it, made it moist, and then you built an identical box over here, and then you move your pile with a pitchfork into this other box, that in effect is stirring the whole thing. And that'll do 2 things for you. It'll process, and it'll tell you how far you are along in the decomposition process, because as you're moving it to the next one, and it's mixing up and reconsolidating, oh yeah, there's still a lot of sticks in here. There's still a lot of coarse material. So, then what you're gonna do, and as you're going like this, you're gonna go, hey, okay, oh, that looks dry. All right, oh, that looks dry too. Okay, now your pile's over here. Now, if you have the time to do it, 2-3 weeks, 1 week, move it back over here. By the end of the summer, it'll be like that. If you don't do what I just said and you just do the first pile, you'll still get this, but it'll take you 4 or 5 years. Right? But you won't just get this, because this went through the screen. And so what you see here is about, maybe 2/3 of it. The other third had to go back in the compost because it's still coarse. But I'll call this usable. I didn't do a soil test, but I'll call this done. I'll call this beneficial to my corn. And yeah, I don't think at that point it can be done wrong. You just let nature do its thing. And then if you want to facilitate, then you stir. And stirring is basically building, this bin and pitchforking it over. And if you have time and energy to do that, you'll see results way quicker than me. Because I'm using the worms, and I'll build the layers, and I'll throw a handful of worms every other layer, and then I just walk away. And then when I did this, it was real fun. I just saw a worm in here. There's earthy worms. It's real nice to be going through my compost, and then every now and then I'll do a shovel full into my thing, into my shifting screen, and there'll be a ball of worms. And I'll just be like, nice. Those worms survived 3 winters, and they're still doing their thing. And they found a pocket that was optimal for them, or they found, a place to make a little worm metropolis. And, so then they say, cool, the worm survived. But either way, you'll end up with compost. It just depends. It's like that triangle: fast, cheap, and easy. Do you want it cheap and easy, or do you want it fast and cheap? Right? So fast and cheap is you pitchforking it into the next bin every 2 weeks. Cheap and easy is you doing it once and see you in 3 or 4 years. Hope that helps.
Yeah.
Question, knowing that earthworms are not native to North America, how is there another worm, or what kind of other worms or other nematodes or alternatives that are native to this area?
Well, the composting worms are the Acinia fetida. I didn't know they weren't indigenous to that area. I know, like, the worms around here, we call them night crawlers. Those are Lumbris terrestris. I didn't know they were invasive either. But I always wonder, what with my composting worms, which I bought from Worm Woman, or she gave them to me initially, wormwoman.com, those worms are from over there, and now I'm bringing them over here. What kind of problems does that create? That's a good question. And, the way I think it goes is that our native worms, I have to look and see if they're actually native, but the ones that I grew up with, at least, knowing that there were worms to dig up and go fishing, which there's a lot less of them now than when I was a kid. I remember when I was a kid, we used to get worms at night with a flashlight. They used to be like everywhere. It was like even weird, and then they would go in their holes. I don't see that anymore, but when I was a kid, that's how it was. But our native worms, if indeed they are native, are burrowing worms. They make channels and chambers, kind of like prairie dogs, and they don't like their soil being disturbed. So you can't really use them for compost. That being said, I've met somebody who did, so don't ever, don't ever say, oh, the expert said you can't do it like that. The expert became an expert because other people think they're an expert because they told you how you couldn't do it. When actually you could have done it that way because, it can be done. So, yeah. But, these worms that you get, the Senior Fatili composting worms, are detritivores and they live on the surface. They live in leaves. So theoretically, if you throw these composting worms in the field, they're not really gonna mix. Because our native worms are burrowing worms and these ones are on the surface as detritivores. And then, but I always wonder, it's like, what am I doing by introducing, and so I keep the worms going in the compost bin. But when I apply the compost, the chickens are gonna go through it. Whether I like it or not. Because if I let them out, they go figure out what I'm doing. And they'll go find it and, they'll do their thing, go through it. So I don't think, in nature, I don't think these worms have a chance. Because of two things. One is our environment is extreme, and that's why the worms that are already here burrow and stay underground where it's cool and moist. And these ones are stuck on the top. They don't know how to dig. They know how to, navigate shredded leaves and such. But, it's too harsh for them to exist on the surface in general. And then you add chickens to the mix and forget it. They're done. They're out. Once they leave the safety of the compost bin, chances are they ain't gonna make it. But yeah, that is a good question, because not just for worms, but anything you introduce in your system, if it goes wild, like sometimes that can be a good thing. Like that, this year I didn't plant buckwheat, but I'm gonna harvest buckwheat. I got all kinds of, when I hold weeds, I go, oh, there's buckwheat from last year, I'm gonna leave it. And everyone says, oh, that's a good cover crop. I go, no, those are good waffles. I eat buckwheat, groats and all that. And yeah, so I'm trying to use the invasives to my advantage. But you always got to think what effect might that have on other things. So that was a good question. And yeah, my opinion is they don't mix. But that's also that cannot be true because life is life. And I'm sure one of these burrowing worms is like, hey, where are you from? You don't look like the other girl. Oh wait, I'm a worm, I'm a boy and a girl. You don't look like the other boy girls. Yeah. Cool, any more questions? Anybody want to see any more stuff? We can enter other realms of interest as well.
Do you have any more classes coming up?
I'm trying to figure it out, how I could be more. I used to have a nonprofit and do this stuff, but now I'm a middle school math teacher as of next Monday. So, or coming.
Well, I don't
next
want to
Monday.
learn math.
Yeah. Just remember the rate carbon nitrogen ratio, you'll be fine. But
This one wants to see the worms.
oh, okay. Now this is the finish. I was sure I made a bunch. I got a
Thank you,
bunch of
everyone.
worms.
I'm gonna end the Zoom.
I'm gonna pass this back.
All right, thank you all for coming
This is how we're going
to teach.
Yeah.
I teach at TISA, Integrated School of Arts. Taos. It's a new job for me though. Last year I was at Taos Academy. I was only there 1 year. And then they offered me a job at TISA. So in the last 3 years, I will be in 3 different middle schools, kind of like in a revolving door. And I think it's because I'd rather be